I want to address the question, is the Sabbath for today? This is a question very relevant today since most have rejected the Sabbath. The secular world has long forgotten any sense of a weekly Sabbath. But Sunday used to be a day of rest even for those who didn't call themselves Christians. Many jurisdictions were under what was known as blue laws, restricting activity on Sunday. When I moved to Louisiana back in the 70s, we were under blue laws. But all of this is a relic of the past. Today, Sunday is just another day. Sadly, though, even some Christians boldly reject the fourth commandment, claiming it to be a relic of the past, or relegating it only to the Jews of the Old Covenant. Some see the Sabbath as inconsistent with the grace of the New Covenant. First of all, we need to see the Sabbath as a part of God's law. The Sabbath is the fourth commandment of the Decalogue, one of the 10 commandments written on stone tablets. God's moral law has existed from the beginning of creation. It was the law written upon Adam's heart. We read in the Second London Baptist Confession, chapter 22, God gave to Adam a law of universal obedience written in his heart, and a particular precept of not eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, by which he bound him and all his posterity to a personal, entire, exact, and perpetual obedience. God's law has not been abrogated. It is his perpetual standard of righteousness and the basis upon which all men will be judged. We really need to understand the threefold use of the law. It has been described as having a political, a pedagogical, and a pious use. Or others have described it as a muzzle, a mirror, and a map. In other words, God uses his law to restrain unrighteousness. It's a muzzle. That's the first use. But it also shows us our guilt and our condemnation. It's a mirror to show us our sin and to drive us to Christ. That's the second use. But after we're saved, it remains God's standard of obedience. It serves as a map to show us the way of righteousness. That is the third use. God's law has not been abrogated. God's law pre-existed the 10 Commandments given on Mount Sinai. When Cain killed Abel, he was guilty of murder, even though it was long before Mount Sinai. Sinai merely codified God's law and put it in the context of God's covenant. But God wrote the law on stone tablets, signifying its permanence. These 10 commands were to be obeyed as long as men dwelled upon the earth. It is the same law that was written on Adam's heart. It's the same law that condemns us by our lawlessness and drives us to Christ our Redeemer. It's the same law that our Lord obeyed, fulfilling all righteousness. It's also the same law written on our hearts in the new covenant, the law upon which we delight. Jesus says in John 14:15, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." He's referring to the same law that he obeyed perfectly, the 10 Commandments. The Sabbath is a part of God's law. Sinai did not establish the Sabbath. It merely codified it as one of the 10 Commandments. The Sabbath was ordained at creation. So we can see in the fourth commandment described clearly in Exodus 20 as it's linked to the creation ordinance. We read, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or your female servant or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. It was a creation ordinance ordained at creation. And there's nothing in the New Testament that suggests that the fourth commandment has been excised from the law. That which God established at creation and affirmed on Mount Sinai is still in force today. The day was changed to the first day of the week to commemorate the resurrection, but this further affirms the perpetuity for the church. The law testifies to God's dominion, his righteous rule. God says, "You shall obey me." Well, the Sabbath is also a testimony to God's sovereignty. It is a declaration of God's sovereignty over time and our use of time. Time began at creation according to God's design. By divine appointment, God established a week to consist of 7 days, and then he declared the seventh day to be holy or set apart. The Sabbath keeps man from playing God. God says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." Or, as God spoke through the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 58, verses 13 through 14, God says, "If because of the Sabbath you turn your foot from doing your own pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, a holy day of the Lord honorable, and honor it, desisting from your own ways, from seeking your own pleasure, from speaking your own word, then you will take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride on the heights of the earth, and I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." God says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy."